making it possible for me to take you on this journey through an unknown country. Oh, we've got a train to catch.
For about $1, you can sit back and enjoy the spectacular scenery of the Harz Mountains. The authentic steam locomotive has brought tourists for nearly a century to this once hard-to-reach mountain landscape. We're getting off at the last stop. In the Middle Ages, Wernigerode was a prosperous trading center. Today, it's remarkable for its outstanding examples of Gothic and Renaissance art and architecture. Oh, it looks like a few tourists have beaten us here. It's hard to believe this peaceful and charming town was ever threatened. But after German pilots started bombing British villages in World War II, the Allied forces retaliated. Many towns like this one were bombed. But this medieval jewel miraculously escaped damage. After the war, Wernigerode had the dubious distinction of becoming a prized vacation destination for East German functionaries. So the communist government poured more money and effort into preserving the historic structures than it did elsewhere. Even when goods were scarce, the shelves in Wernigerode were generally well stocked for the politically important tourists. There were also Western imports, such as the popular Kuckucksplatz from the Black Forest in West Germany. This is everyday reality for most East Germans. Once upon a time, this town was as pretty as Wernigerode, but the communist government proved largely indifferent to the cries of preservationists. Perhaps the Stalinist leaders wanted to blot out of the landscape the architectural remnants of a pre-communist society. The past was treated with contempt. What the World War II bombs did not hit is collapsing under the weight of 40 years of neglect. Because the government ran out of money to tear down the dilapidated structures, there is a chance that some of Halberstadt's historic center can still be saved. These children will have the opportunity to witness the repair of their ravaged town and country, although it will cost untold sums of money to rebuild the crumbling infrastructure, and it will take time. But it will be too late to make a difference for a generation whose world has been shaped chiefly by war and communism. It doesn't take long to cross from the rundown charm of the Harz Mountains to the searing ugliness of the industrial heartland. Bitterfeld is one of the dirtiest cities in the world. It is on the brink of an ecological catastrophe because of the lack of pollution controls in the city's factories. Bitterfeld's soil, air, and water are dangerously polluted. The government systematically repressed environmental groups that tried to focus public attention on the problems. Environmental data was treated by the communist regime as top-secret information. At least 10% of the country's worst polluting chemical and energy plants will be shut down in the next 2 years. Installing pollution controls in the remaining industrial complexes will cost astronomical sums of money. The country's main source of energy, brown coal, caused much of the severe pollution problems. The communist government stepped up its brown coal production after the 1973 oil crisis to reduce its dependency on expensive oil imports. Silbersee is a dead lake, tragic testimony to the cynical disregard of nature. For years, a nearby film plant dumped untreated waste full of silver nitrate into the water. The locals dubbed the site the Silver Lake because of its glittering but deadly shimmer. Now we're heading south along the Elbe River, one of the country's most famous cities. Dresden once housed such a wealth of cultural splendors it was called the Florence of the Elbe. The city first achieved renown as the court of the 17th century princes of Saxony. For 200 years, Dresden's architectural magnificence continued to grow, flourishing under the cultural patronage of its rulers. Important architects built gems of Renaissance and Baroque architecture. In the 18th century, construction began on the elegant and stately Baroque complex of buildings and gardens called the Zwinger. After its destruction in World War II, the Zwinger was rebuilt and today houses more than 10 museums. Much remains to be restored and rebuilt in Dresden. The city is still recovering from devastating firebomb raids by Allied bombers on the nights of February 12th and 13th in 1945. On those two stormy nights in February, American and British bombers destroyed the city of Dresden, killing over 60,000 people and reducing one of the world's most beautiful cities to rubble. Up in flames went countless numbers of masterpieces in art and architecture, like here, the Church of Our Lady, which remains today as a reminder of that horrific event. In Dresden, like cities throughout the country, destroyed buildings were replaced after the war with ugly public housing complexes. The architects forgot the trees, the shops, and the decoration. Complexes like this could become the slums of the future. Not everything was rebuilt so quickly and thoughtlessly. The splendid Semper Opera House was first reopened 40 years after it was destroyed. Whether it was in Treblinka, Auschwitz, Dachau, or in Bergen-Belsen, they all served the same purpose: the destruction and humiliation of human life, like here in Buchenwald. This concentration camp, or death camp, like the others, is today open to the public to commemorate the victims and to remind us of the horrors of the past. Mr. Gesper, was this a cell?
You're looking at the office of the guards in charge of the detention cells.
And I assume these were the tools of the trade.
You can see what can be turned into instruments of death: steel rods, sticks, and hazelwood rods.
And what happened here in this cell?
We created this memorial to commemorate very different people from many countries who were killed here. More than 600 people were locked up in this block of cells, and more than 100 were murdered here.
And many of them were killed in the night just before liberation on the 11th of April, 45, I believe, right?
Yes, that's right. They were killed to remove all traces of their existence. In 1938, the lawn you see over there was fenced in with barbed wire. It became a special detention center for Jews. After the Jewish pogroms came the Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. More than 10,000 people of the Jewish faith were detained in this infamous place.
Wasn't the Nobel Peace Prize winner Elie Wiesel a prisoner here when he was 15 or 16?
Elie Wiesel, einer der Gefangenen hier, so als 16-Jähriger oder 15-Jähriger.
Ja, das stimmt. Elie Wiesel kam.
Yes, Elie Wiesel came here in January 1945 from Auschwitz with his father, who died here 14 days later.
Konnte dieses Lager überleben.
But he was able to survive and lives today in New York. Elie Wiesel lived over there, in that smaller camp.
What is the meaning of these little stones?
Ja, unter anderem
It's the custom of the Jewish people to place stones on their graves and memorials like this as a way to commemorate the dead.
Gedenksteine legen, das ist ihre Sitte. So, was Sie hier sehen, sind
These are the ovens where more than 32,000 corpses were burned.
über 32.000.
They were people from more than 35 countries. There were differences in their social backgrounds, nationalities, and their world outlook.
Sie waren unterschiedlich.
But they shared two things in common. They were all people, and they all wanted to live.
Aber zwei Dinge waren allen gemeinsam. Es waren Menschen und sie wollten alle leben.
Sie arbeiten seit einigen Jahren hier.
You've worked here for a number of years. How do you stand it, working every day in such a horrible place?
Tägliche Arbeit zu einem Ort des Grauens.
Buchenwald ist für mich eine persönliche...
Buchenwald is a personal challenge for me. As you know, the world in which we live is not perfect. There are many injustices and atrocities on our planet. But I think the world can be healed if each person contributes his share. That's why I've set this task for myself.
Ich will alles tun,
I will do everything possible that people are never again forced to a test of their humanity under such difficult conditions.
This monument reminds us of the day the sound of cannon was heard off in the distance. It was the sound of General George Patton's Third Army approaching. And that sound encouraged the prisoners of Buchenwald to free themselves from their Nazi guards. There are probably very few places on earth where the human mind has perpetrated such total extremes. Here on this hill, a system of inhuman mass destruction of life. And there in the valley, a few miles away, the city of Weimar, where 200 years earlier, a cradle for some of man's highest achievements in philosophy, literature, and music was created.
Many great Germans had links with Weimar, and Weimar has strong links with German democracy. In 1919, a constitutional assembly met here to write the first democratic constitution in German history. Germany's first democracy was founded in Weimar as a tribute to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, one of Europe's greatest writers and thinkers. Goethe moved here in 1775 and spent more than half a century as a political and cultural advisor to the Duke. In 1802, Goethe invited the talented writer Friedrich Schiller to work for the city's renowned German National Theater. To Goethe's deep sorrow, Schiller died young 3 years later. The tomb of the two friends immortalizes the accomplishments of these two unforgettable men.
After visiting the Lincoln Memorial, the George Washington Memorial, I find it interesting that the Germans have chosen such a humble place as the final resting place for two of their greatest sons. In fact, for most people, Goethe is considered the world's last universal genius. Oh, and by the way, since I'm here, I think it's about time we Americans learn to pronounce his name correctly. It's not Goethe, but Goethe. I think he'd appreciate it.
Let's take a break from travel for a journey of the soul through the stacks of the Central Library of German Classics in Weimar. There are more than 750,000 books here, dedicated chiefly to German literature. The end of East Germany may mean the end of a national automobile, the Trabi, made from hard-to-rust plastic. For decades, this was the only affordable car for East Germans, if you are willing to wait 12 years to buy one. The Trabi is slow, uncomfortable, and often unreliable, but it does have character.
This unique vehicle is truly plastic fantastic. Oh, how about a Trabi joke? How can you double the value of a Travie in just 2 minutes? Easy, by filling up the tank with gasoline. See, it really works, too. It doesn't always have to be a Benz, does it?
For hundreds of years, the town of Suhl in the southern Thuringian forest has produced weapons prized for their precision and artistry. I've been told that the hunting and sport weapons from this factory in Suhl are the Rolls Royces of hunting weapons. Is this true, Mr. Hack? And if so, why?
Rolls-Royce is a renowned company. Just like them, we assemble everything by hand.
Alles.
Alles.
Jedes Schräubchen.
Jedes.
Each nut and bolt? Wow, that's amazing.
Das ist toll. Und,
Ja.
This is a double-barreled shotgun.
Ein doppelläufiger Schrotlauf.
yeah. That's a
Kaliber
double-barrel
12.
shotgun. We got 12-gauge shotgun. Wenn ich das bestelle,
If I wanted to order something, about how long would I have to wait?
fangen wir von Bestellung bis zur Endfertigung, circa.
Je nach Ausführungsgrad.
Depending on the model, between 9 months and a year and a half.
Aha. Lang. So. Und was muss ich ausgeben? Was kostet?
And how much would it cost me?
Up to $20,000.
$20,000.
$20,000.
Yeah.
These are truly the Rolls Royces of hunting weapons. It's no surprise these elaborately hand-decorated weapons are collector's items. Only about 2,000 rifles a year are produced. Most are exported, a few as far as the U.S. These Germans were proud of this world-famous export. But they were shocked to discover earlier this year the supposedly peace-loving communist government produced and sold large quantities of armaments to dictatorships around the world. The Erzgebirge Mountains on the southern border with Czechoslovakia are a popular vacation spot. The area is dotted with castles, lakes, and forests. But the rural idyllic scene is being increasingly destroyed by pollution, much blown in by the westerly winds from Czechoslovakia. On both sides of the border, pollution has destroyed entire tracts of forest. The Erzgebirge is one of the most dramatic examples in Europe of Waldsterben, which means the dying of forests. For centuries, the forests here in the Erzgebirge provided the raw material for local crafts. It may look easy enough to whittle away at the little figures, but these woodworkers say a lifetime is too little to truly master this difficult art. The toys, manger figures, and nutcrackers produced in the region are shipped to craft connoisseurs throughout the world. The craftsmen still use traditional tools to produce the individual components. Then workers assemble the parts and paint the colorful faces and bodies that have made the Nutcracker internationally beloved. By the way, do you know why there are such fierce expressions on the little men's faces? About 150 years ago, it was a way to convey silent protest by the workers against their exploitation by those in power. Centuries of tradition in much of this country were barely touched by 40 years of communism. The bride and groom still saw away together at a log, an old custom that symbolizes the problems in life the bridal pair will now face together. In the city of Görlitz, the newlyweds descend a Renaissance stairway, the oldest flight of stairs in any city hall in Germany. Then it's off to the honeymoon. This couple may not get far, but they'll sure have fun getting there. Other couples are introducing more modern touches into their weddings. These two will be whisked away in a spanking new Audi. Western cars have quickly become the most important status symbol in this country. This event would have been unthinkable just a year ago. Members of the now defunct East German Army are playing American-style big band music at the inauguration of Görlitz's first democratically elected mayor. It is still hard to believe how quickly change swept this country. Most people seem glad to take a break from politics now and then and just enjoy the new freedom and the more open atmosphere that has brought people back onto the streets.
We want to turn the city back into what it once was, a prosperous center. Görlitz has the fundamental infrastructure and a wonderful old city center. From an architectural perspective, it's one of the most important cities in Europe.
Except for the central square, little was done for 40 years to preserve the houses in this once rich industrial city. Görlitz once thrived as a trading and manufacturing center in the heart of Europe, but it was thrust into near oblivion by its isolated position after World War II on the new border between Germany and Poland. Officially, Poland was considered a brother country in the communist struggle against the capitalist world, but the closely guarded border made contacts between the two nations difficult. This helped keep alive old animosities between the Poles and the Germans. Since World War II, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops have been stationed in East Germany. Despite official propaganda praising friendship, Soviet soldiers are not popular.
Here on a Russian base in Dresden, in front of this museum celebrating the liberation of Berlin from fascism in 1945 by the first Russian tank army, Grigory Kotovsky, I had an appointment with a new friend, the young officer of the Red Army, Lieutenant Volodya Sazonov. Hi, Volodya. How are you? Volodya, have relationships between East Germans and Russian soldiers and their dependents changed since the reunification process began?
Да, я считаю, что отношения изменились сейчас.
Yes, the attitude of the East Germans toward us has changed. That's due to the changes in the social system throughout the world, though. Before, the people didn't have a chance to say openly and honestly what they thought, and to be able to talk about what they didn't consider good. Now they have the chance, and it turns out a certain portion of the population does not have friendly feelings towards us. This is an uncomfortable situation, and we don't understand what we did to earn this. We sense that the West Germans, Americans, and others have more positive feelings about us than the East Germans do.
Thank you, Volodya.
This was the other army in East Germany, the National People's Army, and it collapsed with the fall of power of the communist leaders who called it into existence. Within months, this once feared force of 170,000 men was reduced to less than half. There was little left for the soldiers to do except pack up and contemplate the prospect of switching sides.
All quiet on the Eastern Front. The new signals coming in today to this young soldier here: no confrontation, peace, and friendship. Renee,
Is it possible to change the image of an enemy as easily as changing a uniform?
I would say it's not possible. But many of the soldiers in basic training who started service last May, as I did, no longer have an image of an enemy.
Erst im Mai gezogen wurden, so wie ich, haben überhaupt kein Feindbild mehr gehabt.
At school, they always talked to us about the evil capitalist enemy, but everyone formed their own opinion.
Sein eigenes Urteil hat sich wahrscheinlich dann, oder seine eigene Meinung hat sich jeder selbst gemacht.
The teachers who gave good grades for certain answers have all disappeared now.
Irgendwelche Noten vergeben haben für bestimmte Antworten, die sind ja jetzt auch verschwunden aus dem Lehrapparat.
An officer told me today I was the first American and former GI to ever set foot on this military installation. Historic. One thing's for sure, I'm definitely the last. The National People's Army has ceased to exist.
Königstein is where the German Wehrmacht held American and British prisoners of war during World War II. The German army chose one of the best fortified castles in Saxony, one that served for centuries as a stronghold for numerous dukes and kings. The fortress is one of the most scenic corners of the country, an area dubbed Saxon Switzerland. The region has been turned into a nature preserve to protect the magnificent gorges and mountain ridges carved out by erosion. The area has a high recreational value. This is a fortress of another kind. Bautzen II was a prison used by the East German secret police, the Stasi, to punish those with dissident opinions or those who tried to flee the country. Solitary confinement and long sentences were the rule. The East German government consistently denied holding prisoners for political reasons.
And Bautzen II galt als politische...
Bautzen II was known as a political prison. What was it exactly?
Was war das?
Politisches Gefängnis war da, weil hier
Prisoners were here for a number of reasons: for espionage, crimes against humanity, or assistance in flight attempts, specifically smuggling humans. On the subject of espionage, I believe 2 Americans were imprisoned here for that reason in the 60s.
Not many people know that.
And it was called the silent camp because little information was made public about the character of the institution.
Und jetzt, da die Wende da ist und nicht mehr...
And now that the communist government has been toppled, what has changed here for you? Has this prison acquired a new meaning?
...eine Bedeutung bekommen oder hat sie die alte Rolle weiter?
Für uns hat sich an dem Gefängnis geändert, dass wir keine politischen
What has changed is that we don't have any more political prisoners.
Gefangene mit normaler Kriminalität hier einsitzen.
We have prisoners with the usual criminal backgrounds.
Und dass wir
We have fewer of them, however, and even the highest courts are checking to see if their sentences are still legally valid.
Urteile noch rechtskräftig gelten.
Und was
What has the change meant for you?
für Sie persönlich?
Für uns persönlich
Well, for us, the political change has meant we will be dealing with a new kind of prisoner,
bestand werden zu
and we will no longer be handling political prisoners.
nicht mehr bekommen werden.
Und
And finally, Mr. Peach, can you tell me what will happen to this prison, Bautzen II?
jetzt nicht mehr diese Funktion möglich ist, was wird aus Bautzen?
We hope it will continue to exist as a prison.
Weiterhin bestehen bleibt.
Journalist Carl Wilhelm Fricker spent 4 years as a prisoner in Bautzen II in the 50s.
Ich kann sie nur als ein
I can only evaluate Mr. Peach's comments as a foolish attempt to distract from reality. I don't consider this man so mentally limited in his powers that he could have already repressed these things. The man knows precisely that he is not telling the truth. There is no other way to explain his behavior. The typical prisoner was a government opponent, the dissident who had to be isolated.
The last 110 political prisoners in Bautzen II were released last Christmas, but the confrontation with the Stalinist past has yet to begin. Bautzen was no secret, but few have yet asked themselves why they accepted the persecution of their fellow citizens for the crime of daring to think. There's much more to Bautzen than its notorious prison. This delightful medieval town with its winding streets and red tile roofs is home to the country's only indigenous minority, the Sorbs. About 100,000 Sorbs live in this region. They still maintain their own language.
Такою пипа сухая, да ведем тебе, я со вами уже не апаю, божими, даете шо.
You are a Sorb. What are Sorbs and where do they come from?
They're a West Slavic people who settled here in the 5th and 6th centuries.
Long ago.
1,500 years ago.
Did they also go to the U.S. like other Europeans?
Yes, some Sorbs from Eastern Europe went and settled in Texas, and their descendants still live there today.
I believe you Sorbs got financial and cultural help from the old regime. What's going to happen now, and will you be able to continue your own radio station, for instance?
We hope things will continue, and that we can survive the next 1,500 years, as well as we have the past 1,500.
I hope so. The Sorbs also settled in this magical forest, the Spreewald. No one who has seen its dense network of canals and river tributaries can forget this enchanting world. Despite the terrible abuse of the environment in parts of the country, nature was often left to its own course in East Germany. In our increasingly busy and hectic world, it is a treasure to find such a peaceful oasis. I can only hope that the coming development boom in this country spares the romantic Spreewald from being tamed and pruned. The town walls of Wittenberg can tell stories of a religious revolution that transformed the entire history of Christianity. On the 31st of October, 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Castle Church here in Wittenberg, starting his long struggle with the medieval church. To quote Luther, if you want to come to the source, you must swim against the stream. And indeed he did, marking the beginning of the Reformation. Let's take a look inside. Martin Luther fought against the spreading pomp and corruption in the Catholic Church. He called for a return to the core principles of faith. Luther devoted his life making religion accessible to the common man. His approach was heresy to the ruling religious leaders, who excommunicated him from the church. It was here in the Castle Church of All Saints in Wittenberg that the great theologian is buried.
Here on a hill high above the city of Eisenach in the state of Thuringia in Germany is the legendary 1,000-year-old castle, the Wartburg. In this castle, the reformer, Martin Luther, spent a year of his life, almost a year, 11 months, from the May of 1521, I think it was, to March 1522. For Christians, the most important year of his life. It was in this room that the reformer translated the Bible, or the New Testament, from Greek into German. There were other translations in Latin, but his version was considered the first understandable version, the first readable version, the first popular Holy Scriptures. Here is a copy of that book on the table. On the wall, that's an original. That's Martin Luther, the gentleman with the beret, painted from Lucas Cranach. And if you look over here, you see another portrait on the wall. Legend has it that the devil appeared to Martin Luther as a shadow on the wall. He picked up his ink pot and threw it at that shadow. If you look carefully, you can see the horns. And to prove that graffiti is not a modern-day phenomena, pilgrims and visitors to Martin Luther's room here have left their marks on the wall, as you can see. If you look carefully here, you'll see that a Mr. Stichling Kneipp left his name here in 1733. The United States of America hadn't even been founded yet. I don't think George Washington had even chopped down that cherry tree yet, or had he?
In the centuries after Luther's stay here, the old fortress fell into disrepair. It wasn't until Goethe visited the castle in 1777 that the site regained popularity as an important stop for pilgrims of German culture.
This castle is not just famous because of Martin Luther. 300 years before he got here, another historical event took place. It was organized by Count Hermann. It was probably the first popular song contest or song festival in the Middle Ages. He sent out invitations to all mini-singers throughout the land to come here to compete, and they did. Record has it that there was lots of arguing and debating going on in the rooms here over song lyrics, song melodies, who wrote what first. It's nothing new for the music industry. Opera lovers will probably know about this festival if they are familiar with Richard Wagner's opera, Tannhäuser. He used that event as the storyline. And now it's off to Leipzig to see where another great German composer worked and lived, Johann Sebastian Bach.
Hello.
Hi.
Are you American?
Yeah, American. Television.
Hello.
Yeah, how you doing? You going in there?
Yes, I'm going there.
I just came out. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Really?
Do you believe in the devil?
Oh, more or less I do.
You're not American, are you? You're
I'm from Scotland.
Scotland. You believe in the devil, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Be careful, he's on the wall in there.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Bye-bye.
your stay. Bye-bye. Enjoy Germany.
Thank you.
Okay. Here rests Johann Sebastian Bach, choir director, organist, composer, musical genius. Choirs from all over the world come here to sing at his grave, up to 3 a month alone from the U.S. For over 200 years, his successors, the so-called Thomas Cantors, have, in Bach's tradition, made this church the home for a great musical heritage. Great composers who have honored him by performing here include such names as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Franz Liszt, Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, and Robert Schumann.
For decades, a lethargy has settled over the streets of this once bustling city. Leipzig, one of the most important medieval trading centers in all of Europe, was also a major industrial center until World War II. Little remains today of the city's once great wealth. Even under communism, Leipzig continued its centuries-old tradition of hosting international trade fairs. And it was here where the weekly protests began that toppled the communist regime.
Pastor Führer, Sie sind Pfarrer der berühmten Nikolaikirche in Leipzig.
You're the pastor of the famous Nikolai Church in Leipzig, where people found refuge before and during the revolution in 1989. Could you tell us what the role of the church was during those days?
Ja, das kann man kurz oder lang beantworten. Ich will mal eine kurze
We opened up our church and offered a roof to people who had something to say, but were not allowed to express themselves publicly.
die sich zwar artikulieren wollten, das aber nicht durften öffentlich. Wir waren
We were, in a certain way, the mouthpiece for those condemned to silence.
und haben unsere Kirche geöffnet für die Menschen.
Und welche Rolle hat die Kirche?
And what is the church doing now to help people cope with the past?
Wir müssen versuchen,
We must try and encourage people to impart values to help them come to terms with the situation.
diese Situation zu bewältigen.
Es gibt viel zu tun.
Ja,
There's still a lot to do. I wish you lots of luck.
Please say hello to the people in America for me.
Yes, I will.
Bye-bye. And now I'm going downstairs into one of Germany's most famous Gaststätten, the Auerbach Keller. Famous because of Mr. Goethe's Faust. The story of Faust and Mephisto.
In Goethe's Faust, it was precisely this restaurant where Faust and Mephisto carried out their great debate.
Euer Zukunft? Apropos Zukunft. Wie ist das? Let's try it in English. You do speak English, I think you do. Right. What about your future? Has it changed? Are the chances better since the reunification took place? Have you seen a change? I know they are better, but what have been the changes?
No, I think, for instance, we can go to West now, can see other regions and countries and so on. Then also, I think that the situation for the workers is very other now, very different, because many workers can't work now in their profession. Beruf, I think in German is better. And zum Beispiel auch in
The situation in the shops has improved. There's a vastly better selection, although the prices are high, sometimes more expensive than in some regions in the western part of Germany.
Die Deutschen sind ein sehr starkes und, glaube ich, in diesen Tagen...
Germans are a strong and courageous people. And I would say, when I reflect on the events from the fall of 1989, I want to say again, cheers to your future and to the peaceful future of your Germany, not just East Germany. Now it's time to turn in for the night for the last time in this city of heroes. Tomorrow, there's a new journey waiting for us. This is the land of the thousand lakes, the Mecklenburg Lake region in the north. Like a glistening spider's web, this interlocking water systems of lakes, canals, and rivers enchants and traps the unsuspecting visitor. The former communist government nationalized the country's farmland in the 1950s. The once expansive farms of German nobility became giant agricultural cooperatives. Agriculture was one of the government's most successful exports. Most farmers lived comfortably, chiefly because they were allowed to raise and sell privately small quantities of produce and livestock. Farmers worked set hours and never feared losing their land to the bank, but the centralized, heavily subsidized system nearly collapsed when East Germany switched to a free market economy. The fate of the 800,000 agricultural